In this video, I want to talk all about squatting. Squatting is a basic exercise, but tricky to do really well, which can frustrate people to no end. But it's worthwhile investing in a good squat. Why? Because it's such a functional exercise. It carries over to daily life in so many ways. Getting up from a chair, the toilet, and if we end up on the ground, we have to be strong through the fullest degrees of hip and knee flexion. So it can be tricky though to get deep in a squat. What's the other reason we would care about the depth of our squat? Well, it turns out that if we're only doing shallow squats, we're using almost entirely our quads and some of our hamstring muscles, but very little glute involvement or inner thigh adductor muscles, which we really want to get strong to be able to do fully functional things. So in order to access better squats, we're going to talk about what a good squat looks like and how to tackle problem areas that might limit our squat. So in a basic squat, your feet are set up shoulder width apart. The inside of your feet lines up with your armpit crease, and your toes are only slightly outturned. If you need to turn your toes out more than about 10 degrees in order to get deeper into a squat, it's an accommodation that you're making because you have tension in your glutes or deep hip rotators, which we're going to try and tackle in this video. So again, returning to what a good squat looks like in its basic form, you're tall through the crown of your head, you have an open chest, okay? We don't want to be rounded through our upper back, and we brace our core. We're going to descend, keeping the feet nice and flat, ideally so that the hips are below the knees and our feet remain flat on the ground and our chest is forward. We're not rounded down. We want to make sure our shin angle matches the angle of our torso. And it's hard to get all that in, right? A lot of people struggle with squats below about 60 degrees of hip flexion. Right about here, what we often see is a couple of accommodations. One is the torso folds forward in order to get lower, or what we see is in order to get through the middle of the squat, your back goes into a deep arch, and then as you get to the bottom of the squat, your pelvis tucks under and out again, and you essentially go through this full extension flexion movement through your low back, which may be imperceptible, but you may also be someone who says, squats hurt my back. Likewise, if squats hurt your knees, well, it's likely that these areas that are built for stability are suffering inordinate movement imposed upon them because areas that are meant to move well are stiff. And those areas are primarily our ankles and our hips. Our spine can also lack mobility in the upper portion, but that's a little bit outside the scope of this discussion to address. For now, I want to work from the waist down and talk about tight hips and tight ankles. Starting with the ankles, you'll know if this is you, if you can elevate your heels on a 2-inch, like 1 to 2 inch lift, you can lift your heels and find that your squat depth immediately improves. So that's one way to help yourself, but of course you want to improve your ankle mobility. And we're going to talk a little bit about things you can do. The reason why people get stuck right about at 60 degrees of hip flexion has to do often with the fact that their glutes are weak and tight. Their deep hip rotators are weak and tight. And this may be you if you have sort of nagging deep butt pain or you've had piriformis syndrome. The other thing that we need is external rotation at the top of the squat, internal rotation at the hip, and then external rotation. So we go through this movement, and that rotation ability of the hip in the, or the femur in the socket is really important. So, okay, let's talk about what we're gonna do. This is gonna become your best friend. You're gonna do this pre-workout and ideally every day at some point in the day if you're very tender and feel knots in your muscles. And the areas we're gonna roll are the front of the leg, starting from the pelvic bone here and your front hip, your hip flexor here, which is like your front pocket muscle, all the way down your quads. We're thinking about people who have maybe tight backs from kind of doing this or holding tension back there. Glutes, certainly not if you have active piriformis syndrome. You may find that too tender. And then your calves. So I'm not going to go through an extensive instruction on how to do foam rolling. Suffice it to say that the top part of your hip flexor needs to be done facing down, like so. You need to kind of get on that roller with your body weight and just kind of go up and down in small movements, working your way down. You can certainly do this for the length of your quad, but if your quad is really tight and has lots of knots in it, this may be a bit much. You should never be rolling with breath holding or tension in the muscle. So if your muscle responds by tensing up, then you just want to ease up a bit. So you can use a rolling pin from the kitchen to just kind of gently, or a handheld massager for that area. Moving to the back side, you want to be careful with the back. So don't put a lot of pressure here. You want to be below the rib cage and above your pelvic brim at the back, and on an angle, because you don't want to be right on your spine. You want to be on the muscles on either side of your spine, and you can do one side and then the other. You can also do your fleshy glute. Again, notice how I'm set up. Notice how I'm on an angle, and you're going to do this on one glute and then the other glute, assuming you don't have an active glute issue. Then you can move to your calf, starting from behind the knee, working in little increments along the length of your calf, inner and outer, all the way down to your ankle, taking your time, of course. This is another area that works well with a pin, a rolling pin to do. And so that's something you're gonna wanna do, mostly if you feel knots and tension in your muscles. If you have an area that just feels nice and supple, doesn't have tenderness, you probably don't need to waste too much time doing that, okay? But so the thing I'm going to mention is calf raises are a really great way to help you develop good ankle mobility and calf strength and better tension, length tension through your Achilles tendon. So without going into it too much, because it's in certain other programs, you can get on a stair in your stairwell and support yourself at the wall or with the banister, and essentially hang your heel off the edge of the step and feel that nice stretch that your body weight imposes when you hang on that ankle. And then from there, rising onto the ball of your foot. And do full range calf raises. 3 sets of 10 are useful, but even 1 set of 10 can really go a long way if you're doing it regularly. And I would do 1 at a time. If it's a little bit too much, you can certainly assist with the other leg, or do 2 together until you get better and stronger and you can do single leg calf raises. They do appear in subsequent programs, but if this is an area of tension, you may want to get on it and do it more regularly. Coming back to the hips, now that you've foam rolled, what might you want to consider doing? Well, you want to get used to lengthening those glutes, because weak glutes will hold tension and not want to lengthen. And to teach them to get long, we want to take it down to a mat on your knees, padded knees underneath the knees, and simply think about this hinge movement. But we want to do it with integrity, okay? And what I mean by that is we don't want the movement to come from either the spine. We don't want to achieve this motion through rounding the back. And we also don't want to be pulling it too much from the hamstrings and tensing up the back. So if you're in a posterior tilt with your pelvis and you have a lot of tension you hold in your glutes, it may be a challenge to get in and out of a hinge without imposing on your back. Likewise, if you're in an anterior tilt, really tight hip flexors, and you may be gripping with your deep hip rotators, what you may find is you go into this hinge and you can get there, but it's all felt in your hamstrings. The length is coming from the hamstrings and not the glutes. Okay, so how are we going to tell what's going on? 2 places to put your hands and do this hinge assessment. 1 is in the front, thumbs on lower rib cage, long finger on the top of your pelvic bones. And what you're aiming to find out is whether you can do this sit back hinge movement. So you're tipping your torso and pushing the hips down and back towards your heels. And while you're doing that, that distance between your thumbs and the finger isn't supposed to like increase or decrease. If it does, increasing means you're dumping into your back and you're in an overarched position. You're probably someone who's hinging mostly with lengthening your hamstrings and jacking up your back. Or if you find the distance closes, you're someone who is not letting go with your glutes. They're clenched and you're bending and finding that motion through the low back. So the first place to start is getting a good hinge, because that then informs how your hips show up in the squat. So let's make sure that you hinge with good a neutral spine. The second place you're going to place your fingers, middle and thumb, about 2 inches apart from each other, right on the fleshy middle of your glutes. There, I want you to repeat the hinge motion and see now if, as you sit back, you notice these fingers spread apart. And if you're maintaining that position of your spine, then you should find that there is a spreading of your fingers, because the length should be coming from your glutes. And the other thing you want to notice is, do you feel your sits bones sort of spreading? That should be the sensation as you come back. And if you don't, you're simply going to take your squat out of your program for now and do this work in its place. Just get used to sort of hinging and letting your glutes lengthen under load. It's really good work for you. Now, I'm going to get into the second muscle group. We want to involve the glutes, but recall that we want to get the adductors activated. They do a variety of things to help the hip move in and out of internal rotation, external rotation. And if they're really tight and weak, as they are in many people, what's going to happen is we can't manage that midsection of the squat. So what you can do is you can strengthen these muscles by doing an adductor lunge. So you're going to stand, and now I'm using a plate. Okay, you can use a paper plate, or probably better like a plastic plate on a carpet, or if you're on a floor, you can simply use slippery socks or tea towels under the foot. And what you're doing is basically transferring your weight to the stance leg, the leg that's not going to move, and then you're allowing this knee to bend, keeping the weight over this leg, and then dragging that leg back into the center. You're going to feel, or you should feel, the inner thigh muscles working. And you can do 10 reps like so, and then other side. Remember to keep your weight over the stance leg and not on the moving leg, okay? And drag, feel like you're squeezing your legs together in order to bring your leg back. And so that's a really great exercise for strengthening this muscle. I'm just going to leave you with one other possibility, is that you practice squatting with something like, a yoga block lengthwise between your knees, squeezing inward and learning to bring your adductors strongly into the squatting equation. So what you could end up looking like in effect is this, right? And I'm squeezing inward on the block. So obviously my stance width is not quite as wide, but it's a way to kind of help the adductor show up in your squat. So the things that you want to do are liberate the ankles, get those glutes to unclench and relax into a hinge, and strengthen up the inner thigh. Okay, there's so much more I could say, but I'm going to leave you with that. Work on your squats, and remember not to put a ton of weight on the squat unless you feel your form is really good. Okay, so mastering that movement is more important than overloading it if it doesn't look nice. Okay.